Hi and welcome to my first Blazor video. So Blazor's new technology from Microsoft. I love it. I think it's the greatest thing ever. I hope everybody else is enjoying it as much as I did. So one thing you'll know when you start working with Blazor, there really are no components out of the box. You pretty much have to build everything yourself. Building them is pretty simple. If you know any programming language, you pretty much could figure this all out on your own. I created a way to do a list box that has multi-select. I'm sure there's plenty of people who are going to say there's better ways to do this, but again, I didn't want to purchase anything or use any third-party tool that I didn't have complete control over. So I made it work myself. If you guys have better solutions, I would definitely love to hear them. So I'm going to go through this and hopefully this will help you out. So let's get started. So this is what we'll be building today. And again, I'm going to go through this really fast. But basically we have a list box here. In this list box you can single select an item. You can hold the Ctrl key and select multiple items. You can unselect multiple items by holding the Control key. You can hit the Control key and then you can hit the select a list item and then hit the Shift button. Pick multiple items. You can keep picking multiple items. You could then unselect multiple items. These buttons up here will let you clear the list box and you can select the whole list box. The list box is scrollable, it's sizable, and it has a custom header. So how did I do this? So let me show you. So we go into any application. So I'm using Visual Studio. If you open Visual Studio from scratch, you select a new project, you select a Blazor project. There's server side and there is client side. Either one will work with this. I personally prefer server side, but again, it'll work with either one. So there's a few changes we have to make to get this to work. So we're going to actually create a page. We're going to create a component, and we're going to just modify the menu. So the first thing we're going to do is make our Blazor page. So again, I have all this pre-populated because this is my first video, and I tried doing this by typing it, and it ended up being like 2 hours. And I know nobody's going to sit through a 2-hour video. So first thing we're going to do is make a Blazor page. We're going to point it here up at the top to list page box. So what this does is allow us to set the navigation to point to this page. If we go over to the shared folder, to the nav menu, you'll see all I basically did was copy the last nav menu, pasted it in. I renamed the menu item list box, and then I changed the reference point to our new page, listbox page. Listbox page. So this way when the menu comes up, you will see the list box. We can go right to this page. Okay? This is just a header, just to know that we're on the listbox page. We'll talk about this component in a minute, but first let's talk about the two different methods here and the variables that are set up. So in our code part, where we're going to write our C# code, I set some variables. The first variable here is the drop-down list. So what is the drop-down list? This is basically all the items that you could select in your drop-down list, in your selection list. So I prefer to use a listbox model, where basically I'm using a model to set up my listbox. You can use key value pairs. So either way works. I'm going to demonstrate this using an object model because basically most of the time I get all my data from a SQL Server or from some kind of database. I don't hard code anything, but in this example we're going to hard code some values and then store them in this drop down. So what does my listbox model look like? So again, we create a models folder, and I lost the models folder. Okay, so somehow I deleted my models folder, but I re-added it back. So I made a folder called models. That's where you should be storing your models. All right. So I go in here. This is basically a C# class, and I define my listbox model. My listbox model is going to have a code and a display value. So when you see my listbox, you're going to see a display value, which you can click on. When you click on it, I'm going to actually store a code that I'm storing in here behind. So if you click on item number 1, it might be called code 1. It might be called Apple. It might be called grapes. It could be anything. This is a code that I store in the background that you don't see. This is the display value that you will see. Pretty straightforward. Okay, so we make our model class. Come back to our page here. So basically what I have here is a list of those models, right? So I'm going to be populating this. So what we did here is I'm going to go down and I'm going to make this loop here, and basically I'm going to fill up my model. So we'll come back to that. So list box selected item. This is going to be a list of everything I selected from my drop-down list or from my list box. So if I selected 10 items, I'm storing this here. You don't have to store it here, but I'm going to give you a reason why. So what happens is a lot of times when I'm making a list box from a database and I'll come to a form, I like to pre-populate that, meaning like I'll come in and I'll select 3 of the items and I'll save it. So when I come back to the screen, I can use this list box selection to repopulate it to my component, and I'm going to show you how that works. Okay, so let's go through this. So when this form initializes, basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to instantiate this list box item here. I'm going to set it to empty. I'm actually putting the word empty in there. You don't have to, but for this demonstration, it's in there. So I initiate my list. I set it to empty. The word empty is sitting in there. I instantiate my drop-down list, and I set it to blank. And now I'm going to fill in the drop-down list. So basically, I'm just making a for loop here to get 20 values. I'm making a single list item. I'm filling in the 2 values. I have a code in the display, so all the codes are going to be a number 1 through 10 or 1 through 20, and all the display items are going to be an item plus a number. And then I'm going to store it in my drop-down list. So basically, what you're going to see is item 0, item 1, item 2, all the way through item 19, because I did doing 20 items with a 0 base. You get 0 through 19. And when you click on these items, the actual code, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, is being stored in the back, and I'll show you that so you can see how it works. Okay. So once that's done, we have our test data. And here what we're doing is we're creating a return value that's going to come back from our component. And we're going to store this again because I want to save what's coming back from my list box here, so I can do something with it, whether I save it to a database or do something else. And I can also send this to the component. So basically, I'm taking my list box selected items. I'm instantiating this to 0. I take the items that are going to be returned to me, and you'll see how this is returned in a minute. So items are going to be returned to me in a list of strings. That's everything I selected. And then I'm going to go through a list and I'm going to save it. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking these items back and I'm going through the list and storing it here so I have it. So someone's going to say, well, why don't you just say list box item selected equals selected? Problem with that is this is a memory location if I do that. So if I say this, instead of doing all this and just say this equals selected, this will work. But the problem is this is a memory location, and you're going to run into problems where you think you've saved this, but you update this memory location. If you update this memory location by going back to the list box or something, it actually changes this. So what I want this is to be its own separate memory location. That's why here I instantiate it, which gives it its own location different than this. And then I store it. Okay, so that's what we're doing there. Okay, so I'm going to come back to this because what we're going to do is we're going to set up our component, and then I'm going to show you how I set up all the parameters, and this is how we're calling the list box. So the component we need to make is our list box. So your components should be in your shared section. So you go into your shared, we create a new Blazor component, and we're going to call that Blazor Listbox. Again, I have it pre-populated because I don't want this video to take 2 hours, and I want you guys to see what I did here. So in the top, it's pretty simple. We have some HTML here. Again, this is not a page. You don't go through this from the menu. This is a component. right? I put the word component here so I can show you how it sits in when we run it. So basically what I have here is I have some divs just to make a container to store my list box. Right here I have two buttons. So basically what I have is a button which is my check, and I have a button which is my X, and I have an on-click event for each one. So when you click on this, it'll call this event method to select them all, and it'll call this event method to clear them. And we'll go over those methods once we go through the rest of the display. So here I have a custom header. So again, we're going to set up parameters to send to this component. One of those parameters is a display name. So when I have my list box and I drop my component onto my main screen, I can set over a display name through a parameter, and it's going to put it up top. Then I have my regular HTML select statement with the options, right? So to build a regular list box or a drop-down box, you use a select statement, and then you put options in it. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm sending over some options, and I'm going to populate them into my list box, right? So basically I'm doing a for each loop to go through this data option. So what is this data options? So if you look here, I have a whole bunch of parameters set up. So my first parameter is my data options. So basically what I'm saying, I'm getting from the parent. The parent's going to send me over a list box of list box model. So in our previous page, we populated a list box we populated this drop-down list. Drop-down list is a list of list box model. We're going to send this to our child page. So how am I sending it to my child page? So basically, we called our new component Blazor Listbox. If I just type this here, just so I can use this for example, Blazor Listbox. Just by doing that, that's put my component. That's put our list box on this page. This is saying call this component. And now you can define parameters for this. So one of the parameters we defined is data options. So when you type in, actually let's get rid of it so you can see it, and then I'll show you how it comes up. When you have parameters set in your component, they'll show up when you start typing with IntelliSense. And then you say, well, what am I sending in my options? We're sending that drop-down list. So what's going to happen is this Blazor list box, which is our component, I have a bunch of options I set. So I'm sending a drop-down list, which is our list of options in our list box. A display name is what I want to call the list box on top, so I'm calling it my list box. I'm sending over this display size, which I'll show you in a minute, but basically what this is saying is how high I want my display list to be. This value is, again, so remember I tell you I'm storing this, like I want to store my list box where you already selected 3 items. When you come back to the page, the 3 items are selected. So I'm sending over what's been already selected, which default is 0, right? So default I'm sending over nothing. And then value changed is being used, and I'll explain this more a little bit further. This is my value that's coming back from my child, so I can update my list box. So I'm sending parameters over to my child component, which is my Blazor list box component here, and then when it's done and I make selections, I send it back here so I can save it. And again, we're only storing it here in memory, but I could store this in my database so later on when I come back, I have the values. Okay, so I go here back to our component that we're creating, and again, I got my display name, which I'm sending over, populating here. So the next thing is I have my select box. So remember, so when I make my list box using the select command and the options, you can select them. So how do I get those selections to go into a method? So basically I'm using the bind function, right? So I'm binding option selected. So what happens here is anytime you select an item, it's bound to this variable, option selected. And I'll explain how that works. right? Then I have my size, which I'm sending over a parameter. I told you guys I'm sending over the display size. That'll show you how long it is. This overflow here basically tells the list box that if it's long, if my size is 10 and I have 30 items, let it scroll. This is some styling. I'm adding the font, and I'm saying my box needs to be 250 wide. Right? Again, in this, I put in here, you can make your own CSS outside it, but for this purpose, I'm just showing it right here. Okay, then I'm basically just doing a loop here. I'm saying, hey, first is my data options that I sent over. Remember, data options is my list of items in my list box, and I'm going to loop through them. So I'm saying check every option in there and display it. So it goes through the whole list. If I have 20 options, it's going to go through. It's going to make an option class. It's going to put it in here. Then what I'm doing here is I have two pieces of code in here. I have this mouse event, which I need to use, which I need to capture anytime a mouse event is pressed on the Control or the Shift key, plus the mouse event, I'll be able to capture it. Here I'm storing the code. Remember I told you we had our model. Our model, where is our model here? Our model has a code and a display value. So what happens is when you build your options, you have the value that is in a code, and then I have a value that's displayed. So the display value is what you see on the screen. The code value is what I'm storing when you click on the value. Okay. The next piece is the selection mode. So unlike a normal list box, which again would be nice if Blazor had list box out of the box, but right now it doesn't. So what I did was I made it so when you click on the item, it's actually going to store the background in gray. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm setting a style. So based on the style, what I'm doing is I add some C# code here, and I'm saying if the value you selected is in the list, right? So value contains, if my list contains the value, set the background to light gray. So what is it doing? So when it loops through and it's rendering the list box, it's checking my list of saved values and saying if it's in that list, make it gray, otherwise leave it white. Okay? So here's how I'm doing all this, right? So I set up my parameters. So again, I got my first parameter, which is my list box. That's the items that you can choose. I got a parameter here called display. That's a display name that's on top of the list box. So I'm sending that over, and then I'm showing it up here, right? My display size. So the nice part is about doing these parameters, you could set defaults. So we're sending over in our box here, we're sending over 10. Here we go. Display size is 10. So that means it's going to show 10 and it's going to scroll the rest. If I forgot that or didn't put it in, it's going to default to 15 because that's what I put in as a default. So if you send it over, great. It will put it inside here. If not, it's going to use 15. Next thing is I have here is a single selection, which is my value, right? These are my values. So this is my list of strings. So what happens is as you keep selecting items from the list box, we're going to store it here in this value, right? And then I have my event callback. So my event callback, again, if you don't understand this, there's plenty of videos on this. But basically what's going to happen here is after we're done selecting our box, I want to send that value back to my parent. So I use a callback function, which is going to send back the list of strings, which is our value. And I'm going to send it back with this parameter. And that's going to come back here, value change, which basically is an anonymous class, a T-type, which there is actually a way to define that T-type, which I'm going to have to do in another video. If you wanted to, you can do an anonymous in, and you can actually define it. But right now, it's going to come back automatically in here as an anonymous type, and it's going to go to this function, this method, my box. So when it returns the value to value change, it's going to come to my box. My box is going to return, which we said a list of strings, right? Because that's what we have here, a list of strings, and that's what our value is, a list of strings. We're going to send it back. It'll send it back. It'll come into here automatically. It'll populate here, and then I just loop through it and save it. Okay, so let's go back. So here I'm storing a variable for my mouse events. So again, here on the select box, when you click on it, I have a mouse event variable, right? So anytime you click on a variable, anytime you click on a list item, I'm storing the mouse event in this variable. Okay, so here is my option selected variable. So remember, we bound the option selected. When I click on the select box, the option selected is bound. When you click on it, it'll come here and it's gonna set the value. So what it's gonna do is gonna say, if option selected is not equal to null, meaning you selected something, it's gonna go and set this value. So this method will be called once you click anything on the list. When you click that, it's going to drop down to our options selected. And this is where we're going to make a few functions to do two things. We're going to do our control key and our shift key. Right? So in here, you'll see I have some variables here. Basically, what these variables are for is when you set up the list box. Let me run this so you can see it. Here's my list box. So basically, we're doing the shift key. So if you click an item and you select an item graded in it, it's going to go from 1 to 6. If you click an item and the item is the next item you click is before it, it'll do it the other way. So it works both ways. So what I'm doing here, and this is, I'm going to go through this very fast. If you have any questions, you're going to have to ask me. I mean, again, this is my first video. I'm trying to get it down to under a half hour. So basically what I'm doing, I'm coming in and I'm gonna get a starting point and an end point. I get the option selected, sends over the value that was selected. My mouse event is storing, my current mouse event is storing my mouse event. And like I said, if you look in here, you'll see the Alt key, the Shift key, the Control key. So what I'm saying here is if the current mouse event is Shift key and the list of items selected is not empty, meaning you can't do a shift when it's empty. So if I do shift and there's only nothing selected, I'm going to skip all this. If the shift's there and there's something selected, basically what I'm doing here is I'm looping through and getting the count of the item you selected. So if you selected item 5, I keep going through till I find the one that matches. I say, okay, my starting point is 5, and then I go through my list and I say what has been selected already. I find that starting point, and then what I do is I check, is the item you selected prior to the item that was already selected or after the item you selected? This way I can get my start and end point. Based on where it's sitting in the start or end point, I basically say my start point is, if it's prior, I say start from 1 to my new selection. If it's the other way around, I flip it and I say, okay, you initially had number 5 selected, but now you selected 1. I need 1 to be my starting point and 5 to be my end point, and I just flip it. So I'm either going from 1 to 5, or I'm always going to make it, no matter what, starting from the lowest to the highest. Okay, so I go through here and I do some. This is just flipping your starting point, and then I just loop through it. Basically, what I do is I loop through the list. I have a starting and an end point, and I add it to my list. What I do here, this is to avoid any duplicates. I basically say, look, if it's in the list already, and I'm going from 1 to 5, and 1 has already been in my list, don't re-add it, because I don't want any duplicates. Okay, so that's the part with the Shift key. To do the Control key, it's even simpler. So basically here, I'm just checking if the Control key is not pressed, or the list is empty, just clear it out. That means I'm clicking a single item, clear everything out and start from scratch, right? So when you click on the list, I click on one item and then I click to the next item, it won't keep saving them. If you did press the key and the values in the list, it'll remove it. So the way it works is if I click on an item and I hold the control key and the item was already in the list, it's already grayed out, it's going to remove it. If the item's not in it, it's going to add it. So it's basically saying, hey, look, does my list contain the new value you selected? Yes, it does. If the item isn't in the list, add it. If the item's not in the list, remove it, right? So then you're saying to me, oh, well, I don't get how you're pressing the control key here. Right here is where I'm saying, if you don't press control key, clear the entire list. If you're holding the control key, keep what's in the list and either add a new value, or if I clicked one that exists, remove it. So that's what I'm doing there, right? If you keep hitting the control key and you unselect everything and the list is empty, I'm just putting the word empty in there. And again, this is for display, I'll show you. And then I'm returning it back to the parent, right? So I'm taking the values of whether you use the shift key or use the control key, and then I'm taking the new list and sending it back to the parent so you can store it. Okay? And in addition to that, then we had our two methods for select all and clear list. So these are pretty straightforward methods. So if you hit the clear list button, you hit that X, it basically takes the whole list, clears it, stores the word empty, sends it back to the parent. If you hit the select all, it clears the list, it does a loop through the entire list and adds everything to it, so the list is full, and then sends it back to the parent. So to show you all this in action again, we go back to our list box, we click on it. So again, here's my list box empty. If I click one item, then click another item, it's clearing the list and selecting a new one. Clearing the list, selecting a new one. If I click it and hold the control key, it's saying, hey, don't clear the list, keep the first one I selected and add a new one. Don't clear the list, keep the ones I've already selected, add a new one. If I click on the item that was already selected while I'm holding the control key, it says, don't clear the list, but get rid of the ones that I just selected. If I click one and then I hold the shift key and I click another one, it says, okay, go from one point to the next and fill it in with no duplicates. If I hold the shift key down here and I press the 9, it's going to start from the 6 and clear to the 9. Okay? If I hit my check box, it's going to fill in everything. If I hit my X box, it's going to clear in everything. And that's your whole list box. So again, I know I went through this very fast. And the reason I did again is because I did not want this video to be 2 hours long, because this is my first time doing this and I tried typing it. If you do need any help on this, or if you have a better solution, I would love to hear it. Please, fill in the comments below and I'll definitely respond back. And I hope this helped you out. Thank you so much.